Whenever I'm talking about new scalers or HDMI mods, I often use the term 5x, but I never really took the time to explain what it is. Basically, it's scaling the original signal from a classic console to 5 times its original height. It cuts off some of the unused area on the screen, but that's almost always okay. I've been using 5x mode for years with the open source scan converter, and it's also available on the Mister, PS1 Digital, CPS HDMI, and pretty much all the modern scalers that just came out or are coming out this year. With so many devices now supporting this mode, I wanted to take a look at exactly how it affects your games and demonstrate why most retro gamers would almost always want to use this mode. So stick around and let's take a look. All video game consoles made before the year 2000 were designed to be played on CRTs, analog displays that didn't have any set resolution. As long as a CRT was receiving a 15 kHz analog video signal, it would work. Well, in the age of flat panels, everything has a set resolution, and you need scalers to adapt those analog signals to modern resolutions. Here's an example of how that works, and I promise I'm not going to go into some crazy technical deep dive. This is just a basic overview of the different scaling modes. The average resolution of a classic game console is 240p, which is around 320 pixels wide by about 240 pixels tall. If you were to display that image on a 1080p flat panel, here's how much space it would take up. As a result, you need to scale that image to the native resolution of the TV. One major problem retro gamers have is all flat panels soft scale whatever signal it receives to its target resolution. This is probably fine for games that have 3D graphics, and of course it's fine for video signals, but it doesn't do a good job with classic 2D graphics. As a result, the retro gaming community relies on devices to sharp scale the image to as close to the native resolution of the panel as possible. The easiest way to retain this sharpness is to use a method called nearest neighbor, which is an exact integer scale of the original image. That means to retain the most possible sharpness, you need to scale in round numbers. 2 times the original resolution, or 2x for 480p. There's also 3x for 720p, which is great for some streamers, or if you're using a 720p flat panel. Here's where things start to get weird though. A 4x scale leaves a lot of space on the top and bottom of a 1080p screen. There's nothing wrong with playing games this way, and it's actually an excellent resolution for people who stream in 1080p, as it leaves plenty of room for overlays in a webcam. That said, it's my strong opinion that if you're gaming on a flat panel, you'll want to use as much of the screen as possible without hurting the aspect ratio while keeping a sharp scale. Here's where 5x comes in. Technically, scaling 5x goes over the height of a 1080p resolution, but how come it still seems to fit properly? There's a few answers to this. The first is something called overscan. See, most TV signals store a tiny bit of information in the top and bottom of the image, and CRTs would usually cut that tiny bit off to compensate. CRTs are far from perfect though, and most consumer TVs from the 80s and 90s cut off a bit too much of the image. This TV is from the early 2000s, when even cheap CRTs were pretty high quality, but you can still sort of see what I mean. You can't quite see the exact top and bottom of the image. As a result, video game designers usually took this into account and tried not to keep any important info in the very top or bottom of the screen. There's one more important factor though. The resolution that we call 240p is usually more of a nickname than a specific resolution. I'm going to give examples of exactly what this is, but don't worry, there's only 1 or 2 boring screenshots. We'll get to the actual game footage soon. While we use the term 240p to describe the generic vertical resolution of retro games, it's often less than that. A common resolution found in many classic consoles is only 224 pixels high. So when you scale 240p 5 times, you get a vertical height of 1200. This cuts off about 120 pixels from the image, or about 24 pixels from the original image. That's not too bad, but look at what happens when we adjust it for 224 pixels high. Now you get a resolution that's 1120 pixels high, which means only 20 pixels are cut from the top and bottom of the screen, which is actually only about 4 pixels from the top and bottom of the original image. In many cases, this is actually about the same cutoff area that you'd see on an average CRT, so game developers wouldn't have usually put any important information into these areas. It gets better though. Some games didn't even use the full 224 pixel height. The Atari 2600 only outputted an image that's 192 pixels high, so 5x mode fills a lot more of the screen, but doesn't cut anything off at all. Same with the Sega Master System. That's right, every single awesome SMS game can be played with a 5x scale, and you won't cut off a single bit of info. NES games would vary, and every one can be played in a 5x mode without losing any information. However, aligning the image might help. Unfortunately, the OSSC doesn't have an easy way to do this, but the CPS HDMI, MiSTer, and pretty much all upcoming scalers have the option to adjust the vertical location of the image. So if you're playing a game in 5x mode, you can simply adjust it and center it perfectly. It doesn't stop there though. Even games from the 16-bit era work great in 5x mode, although it really helps to adjust each one. Here's a link to the past, and the door on the bottom of the screen is just cut off. This actually wouldn't bother me, especially considering the trade-off of how much more of the flat panel is being used in 5x mode, but just bumping the vertical height aligns this perfectly. Oh, but now when I fire up Super Mario World, it looks off. No big deal, just quickly bump the image again and it's near perfect. Not all games from the 16-bit era cut off though. Here's Virtua Racing for the 32X and 5X mode, and as you can see, it still doesn't fit the whole screen. This was also common with all Super FX games for the Super Nintendo, such as Star Fox. Also, many Sega Genesis games had a border around the screen. Playing it in any mode other than 5X will show the border, and while it's not distracting, it's definitely a waste of space. 5X mode might come close to cutting into the coin counter or something, but the trade-off is definitely worth it. And of course, all FMVs, even deep into the 32-bit era, also only used a portion of the screen, once again making 5X the best choice.
You with me, Control? We're going in.
Once you dig into the 32 and 64-bit era, I still found 5X mode to be a perfect fit. While yes, I did see plenty of title and menu screens slightly cut off, and maybe a life bar that had a few missing pixels, it never affected the actual gameplay. So when you see people in the comments throwing up an "actually," they're probably talking about title screens, or they didn't vertically center the image like I've been showing. As a note, even if your TV is a 4K TV, all of this is still totally relevant. While yes, your TV will probably soft scale from 1080p to 4K, it's going to be a lot less noticeable than going from the original resolution soft scale to 4K. Now, obviously the ideal scenario would be to have a scaler that goes all the way up to the native resolution of your panel, but none of those are available now, and there might not be for at least a little while in the future, as the prices of those scaling chips are still really high. Okay, so when wouldn't you want to use 5X mode? Well, the number one reason would be if your TV isn't compatible. See, most TVs made before 2018 really reacted strangely to these crazy signals coming from retro gaming consoles, and if you were using an open source scan converter or one of the CPS HDMI boards, your TV just might not like the weird 5X signal it sent. However, with all TVs that were made in the past few years, I've had some really good luck, and any of the more modern scalers coming out this year, or even the Mister, are fully compatible in 1080p 5x mode with pretty much every TV. I actually don't think I've ever found a TV that wasn't compatible with the Mister in 5x mode. So that's definitely the number one reason, is compatibility. It's just not an issue that you're going to run into nearly as much anymore, either with modern TVs or modern scalers. The only other reason you wouldn't want to use 5x mode is if you find a game that cuts off too much of the screen. Honestly though, it's rare you'll see actual gameplay affected by any console, and even games that do fill the screen don't usually put anything important on the top or bottom. Arcade games are a different story though, as those games were designed to be used on a directly wired and calibrated RGB display, not a consumer-grade TV. All arcade games from the 80s and a lot from the 90s still worked perfectly in 5x mode, but starting around the CPS2 era, I did see a few games affected. If you run into any situation where you need to see the full screen vertically, it's an easy solution. Just set your scaler to 480p or 720p, that's 2x or 3x modes. This will result in an image that's not as sharp, but you'll get every original pixel displayed. If you're using a 4K TV and your device supports it, try 1200p or 1440p modes. They're still an integer scale, and if your TV is compatible, they'll look really sharp. I still prefer using more of the flat panels width in 5x mode, as well as having the more accurate overscan look a CRT would provide, but it's nice to know there's still great options if I need them. Of course, someday having a 4K scaler that could let you select 9x, 10x, and 11x modes would be the best option though. So look, the purpose of this video wasn't to try and force people to use 5x mode on their scalers. I really just wanted to clear up a lot of the misconceptions about it and show some of the advantages you get. But in all honesty, as long as you use a scaler that's designed for classic video game consoles, there really isn't a wrong answer. Any resolution that looks good to you and any setting that looks good to you is the right move for your setup. Just make sure to stay away from any of those scalers that are designed specifically for TV signals, or of course some of those knockoff cables that have TV scalers inside but they're still labeled for game use. Check out my other videos for more info on those. If you liked this video, please consider supporting my channel in any way. Monthly support services keep this all going, but tips and affiliate links are a huge help too. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.